I'm Rose Aguilar, and this is Your Call. Today, we are wrapping up our series on Project 2025, the Heritage Foundation-led authoritarian plan that would guide a second Trump administration and radically transform all aspects of life. We began our series back in July, and you can find all of those shows at kalw.org, click News, and Your Call. The 900-page extreme right-wing plan would ban medication abortion, cut programs and services that fight poverty, including Head Start, roll back environmental regulations, and open the floodgates to oil and gas drilling, arrest and deport 11 million undocumented immigrants, use the DOJ to punish Trump's opponents, and plunge the country into authoritarianism. There is so much more in Project 2025. We spent a lot of time going over details that really have not gotten media attention, like getting rid of Head Start. And again, I hope you can listen to those shows and share them with people who care about these issues. Trump's inner circle says they will do all of this by firing federal civil servants and replacing them with MAGA loyalists. Those who are not loyal will be fired. ProPublica has obtained even more videos, this time of Project 2025 architect and Trump ally Russell Vought saying a new Trump administration, quote, must move quickly and decisively to turn the tables on the left. Russell Vought served as director of the Office of Management and Budget during Trump's first term. He is currently the president of the Center for Renewing America, which has been working to infuse Christian nationalism into Trump's policies should he return to power, according to Politico. According to ProPublica's investigation, Vought has made comments in 2 private speeches that a Trump administration will seek to make civil servants miserable in their jobs and use armed forces to quell any domestic riots. He also defended those detained for alleged crimes committed during the January 6th insurrection as political prisoners. Joining us to talk about what is at stake are 2 guests. Ann Nelson is the author of the book Shadow Network, Media, Money, and the Secret Hub of the Radical Right. She has written about Project 2025 for the Washington Spectator and the Progressive magazine. Ann Nelson joined us in July to break down the conservative groups behind Project 2025. Hi, Ann. Thanks so much for joining us again.
Thanks for having me, Rose.
Great to have you. Stephen Greenhouse is a longtime labor and workplace journalist and writer. He has covered Project 2025's plans to gut the civil service with mass firings and undermine labor rights for The Guardian. Hi, Stephen. Thank you so much for joining us again.
Hi, Rose. Nice to be here.
Well, it's great to have both of you. I have to say, in the first couple of months, reading what I just read there was pretty shocking. And I was really asking myself, am I actually saying this? But now this is where we are. And Anne, one of the things that has really come out in our shows is all of the guests have said, most people in this country are still saying, oh, that will never happen here. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I've been traveling around the country speaking at screenings of Bad Faith, a documentary that is largely based on my book. And what I can report is that it's already happening in many states in this country. One thing that you see is the application of draconian abortion laws that are actively harming the health of women, who, including with wanted pregnancies that have complications. So the imposition of this hyper religiosity on the state, which is founded entirely on narrow sectarian fundamentalist principles, in my home state of Oklahoma, which is really one of their laboratories, that is proceeding apace with the imposition of Bibles in every single public school classroom. So it's not only that it can happen here, it is happening here, and the goal is to spread it to the entire country.
To your point about abortion, I just want to highlight a piece that just came out in ProPublica by Cassandra Jaramillo and Kavitha Sarana. A Texas woman died after the hospital said it would be a crime to intervene in her miscarriage. Her name was Josely Barnica. Doctors said it was inevitable that she would miscarry. They waited 40 hours for the fetal heartbeat to stop. She died of an infection 3 days later. More than a dozen doctors who reviewed the case at ProPublica's request said her death was preventable. They called it horrific, astounding, and egregious. I don't know how many women have died because of these Trump abortion bans, but we know that about a handful have, thanks to ProPublica reporting. We'll definitely do a show about this. Stephen, what would you add there? A lot of people are still saying this could never happen here, but as Anne says, it's really already happening in some states across this country.
So as you've discussed with your listeners, Rose, and as Anne has written, Project 2025 was put together by many former Trump administration officials. At least 140 people who worked for the Trump administration helped write this 900-page volume, sponsored by the Heritage Foundation, which in turn got millions of dollars from big corporations and right-wing billionaires to do this project. And it really is a right-wing wish list. And if Donald Trump is elected, all of us who've watched Trump's, halfway unhinged speeches, we can see he doesn't focus on policy. If and when he's elected, he's going to need people to put forward, policies for him to run the various federal agencies. And, Russell Vought, who used to run his Office of Management and Budget, will undoubtedly get an important position in the next Trump administration. He's one of the big boys behind Project 2025, and I'm sure they'll try to graft a lot of ideas from Project 2025 directly into the federal government. And I mainly write about labor and workplace things, and some of the things recommended by Project 2025 were implemented by the Trump administration and his first administration. Then Joe Biden rescinded a lot of them. And now, again, if Trump's elected again, we'll see all these, anti-worker, anti-union policies, be, refloated and be implemented again. And, a lot of what I've written about Project 2025 is that, for average American workers, Project 2025 will be really bad. It will make it much harder to get overtime pay, for instance. It would end the 40-hour work week and have an 80-hour work week. So you would only get overtime if you work more than 80 hours over 2 weeks. So you could work 65 hours one week and 25 hours another week. And even though you work 55 hours one week and 25 hours another, and even though you only work 55 hours in 1 week, 15 hours more than 40, 15 hours more than 40, you would still get zilch overtime pay. So in many, many ways, Project 2025 is very bad for workers, and it's very good for Trump's corporate friends who've donated tons of money to his campaign.
We played a clip yesterday or the day before about Trump saying that he does not like to pay overtime, and he brings in other people to prevent paying overtime. And as you said, Stephen, this is another aspect of Project 2025 that just hasn't gotten much attention. I mean, there's just so much in it, but it would cut overtime protections for over 4 million workers. Anne, what are your thoughts? Go ahead.
4 million understates things.
Okay.
Because on one hand, President Biden issued overtime rules that extended overtime to 4.3 million workers. And if Trump's elected, he could rescind that, and those 4.3 million workers would be screwed. Second, Project 2025 calls for enacting a law to basically overturn the 40-hour work week. And if that happens, and you have an 80-hour work week, you only get overtime when you work more than 80 hours over a 2-week period, that's going to hurt tens and tens and tens of millions of workers, not just 4.3 million. That's why I'm trying to make that point. So,
no, thank you. I appreciate that, because I was reading from the Democracy Forward plan. They put this out, a bullet point of what it would do. And we'll talk more about what hasn't gotten attention. I want to ask you both about media coverage of Project 2025. It seemed like there was so much more media attention about 6 months ago, 2 months ago, but it's tapered off a bit. Just overall, Anne, how do you think the major media have done in covering Project 2025?
Well, I think that there's just so much noise in the atmosphere right now that it's hard for anyone to concentrate. If I were king, I would be playing the story, or if I were editor in chief, I guess, that Trump has been having conversations with Putin, as has Elon Musk. At the same time, Elon Musk and Trump are talking about a joint administration. For me, this is a huge story, but it surfaces, then it disappears. I think that Project 2025 has had a similar situation. And in fact, you even have some obfuscatory action going on here. Last Thursday, the New York Times published a story about the America First Policy Institute and saying, oh, well, they've actually superseded Project 2025. And they have entirely missed the plot about how interconnected they are through organizations like Turning Point USA and individuals like Stephen Miller. So there's kind of a short memory span and a lack of connective investigation here that is not serving the public well.
We have not done a show, Anne, about Elon Musk's conversations with Putin. The Wall Street Journal broke the story 5 days ago. Regular contacts between the world's richest man and America's chief antagonist raise security concerns. Topics include geopolitics, business, and personal matters. What would you like to say about that?
I would like to say that the American people should be alarmed that the man who controls Starlink, on which a lot of the U.S. defense structure is dependent, as well as commercial enterprises, is in contact with somebody who is trying to disrupt the American democracy. This is a problem.
And Starlink
Let me just jump in. Sorry.
Just quickly, Stephen, just for some context, because as Anne said, there is so much going on. So Starlink is the satellite internet service. And at one point, according to the Wall Street Journal, Putin asked Musk to avoid activating Starlink over Taiwan as a favor to Chinese leader Xi Jinping. This is according to two people briefed on the request. Go ahead, Stephen.
Sure. So adding more context, Elon Musk has donated at least $119 million to help the Trump campaign. That's a super lot of money. And I suspect that by now he's probably up near 150 or 200 million. That's probably more than any human being has given in any presidential campaign since the beginning of the Republic. And Trump is rewarding, told Musk he'd rewarded by making him the efficiency czar of the whole federal government. And Musk said the other day, unbelievably, that as government efficiency czar, he thought he could cut at least $2 trillion from the budget. And this is a very rich guy who has no idea how hard it is to survive on Social Security or how important Head Start is to many families. And this is the guy Donald Trump says should be in charge of, he'd be maybe become the second most important person in the government. And as Anne said, it's scary that this guy who would have so much power is talking to Putin. I mean, what are they saying? And Putin's no dummy. Is he manipulating Musk in certain ways to undermine, America's military or undermine, the CIA or undermine Ukraine? So it's very worrisome.
And this is interesting. I had no idea that Musk had security clearance until this article. According to the Journal, Elon Musk has forged deep business ties with the U.S. military and intelligence agencies. SpaceX, which operates Starlink, won a $1.8 billion classified contract in 2021 and is the primary rocket launcher for the Pentagon and NASA. Elon Musk has a security clearance that allows him access to certain classified information. So thank you for bringing that up, Anne, because there's so much going on. And like I said, we just have not talked about it. Stephen, what are your overall thoughts about media coverage, major media coverage of Project 2025?
So I actually think the major media did a quite a good job on Project 2025. Yes, you're right, Rose. It was 4 and 6 months ago, but they saw this was important. They saw it was complicated. And, the major newspapers, the New York Times, Washington Post, LA Times, to a lesser extent, the Trump-friendly Wall Street Journal, wrote a series of very good stories on Project 2025. I know NPR and the PBS NewsHour did a lot of good stuff. I don't watch, the evening news very much at 6:30, but I imagine they did some good stories. But it is rather concerning that, there is much less news focus on Project 2025 right now because it's potentially such a huge and dangerous issue. But I think Anne is absolutely right. There's so much else to focus on right now. John Kelly and Mark Milley saying that Trump's a fascist, the insanely racist things that have been said on behalf of the Trump campaign. So it's hard to, focus on everything when there's so much else going on. But I generally think, that the principal stories in the media of Project 2025 were very smart, very incisive. They pointed to the problems. They pointed to how unpopular Project 2025 is in many ways, how it would hurt women, how it would hurt workers. So I think they've done a good job on that.
I wonder what you both think, given that this information is out there, although our media ecosystem has changed so much just in the last couple of years. Anne, why do you think Trump is still, if we can believe the polls, and we'll find out soon, why do you think he still has so much support, given all of this information that is now out there?
Well, we talk about the major media, and in terms of the media that can go deep and go long on these important stories, traditionally a lot of it has been daily newspapers, such as Stephen Greenhouse's excellent labor reporting over the years, which has been, really foundational. But look at it this way: if you add the three biggest papers in the country, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and the Washington Post in that order, you get fewer than 20 million subscribers digital. This is a country of 330 million people. So this is not an important percentage of the electorate. And people are increasingly getting their news from, I would say, bad actors. These media systems that report falsehoods, sometimes intentionally, sometimes because they're lazy and they're poor journalists. But you've got a very, very active misinformation and disinformation system going on. And as it happens, a lot of it is not very visible to those of us who live on the coast, but it's extremely hyperactive in the middle of the country, including most of the swing states. So I would include Sinclair television stations. I would include Fox, but I'd also include right-wing talk radio, fundamentalist broadcasters, and then this plethora of digital platforms and social media operations that are actively misleading people.
We had Tom Hartman on recently, who wrote a piece called U.S. Fascism Has Arrived Thanks to 30 Years of Right-Wing Talk Radio Dominance. And he writes that there are over 1,500 right-wing radio stations in the United States, along with another 700 or so religious stations that regularly endorse Republican memes and candidates for office. Stephen, what would you like to add to that? Even among people that you write about, the working class, why does Trump still have so much support at this point?
I read something that the great writer Pete Hamill wrote some years ago about why it was that, that so many white working class people were supporting George Wallace back in the 1970s. And he said, a lot of Americans, when American men, he's focusing on men, when they're 25, they think, the world is their oyster. They're going to, pursue the American dream. Everything's going to be good. And when they're 50, 55, they realize, they're still lower middle class. They're still working class. And they're like pissed off at the world and they have grievances. And then George Wallace comes along and says, it's all their fault. It's not your fault. You worked hard. You're a good American, but it's your fault. The blacks, the Hispanics, and I think Trump, in the same way as George Wallace, taps into these grievances. A lot of Americans are frustrated. A lot of people are frustrated. It's hard to get ahead. As a middle class, as a working class, so as a poor American, because so much of the wealth, unfortunately, is going to the people on top. And if wealth would distribute, if income were distributed much better, so many people in the lower 50, 60, 70% would have much more satisfactory lives. But a lot of Americans are frustrated, that things haven't gone as well for them. They haven't gotten the promotions they wanted, that their income isn't keeping up with inflation. And here comes Donald Trump, who says, I feel your grievance. I will fix everything for you. It's all the fault of Joe Biden or Barack Obama or the people at the border or the blacks. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of people, grab onto Trump's, simple solutions and fake sympathy. Trump is an amazingly good snake oil salesman, and he's entertaining when he talks. I hate to admit that. And he draws big crowds because lots of people are really attracted to him. And again, Ann is totally right. There's the whole right wing, Fox News, Breitbart, Steve Bannon, media system, media silo that all these people get locked into, and they hear one or two Trump speeches and they're attracted, and they go further and further through the looking glass into this this right-wing world where there's so much fake news, so much inaccuracy. It would be interesting, and I discussed this. How much did Fox News cover Project 2025 and the problems it would create for women or create for workers? Project 2025 is horrible for construction workers and construction unions. I can't imagine that Fox News said a word about that. And a lot of construction workers support Trump. And if they knew how bad Trump's agenda would be for them, they might hesitate. But, the MSM has pointed, the mainstream media has pointed that out somewhat, but the right-wing media won't touch that with a 10-foot pole. So I think Trump, unfortunately, is a genius at knowing how to manipulate people and appeal to people's grievances, and people glom onto him. And one of the big problems we face as a nation is how to, get people, they're so stuck to the Trump tar baby. How do you get them to see the world in a sane, sound way, without, to free them from the kind of the infection of Trump and his distorted view of the world. I have a big piece in The Guardian today saying, if Trump wins, a big reason will be his huge lie. He keeps saying the economy is a nightmare. The economy is doing terribly. The economy is the worst ever. And that's total BS. The economy is doing very, very well by virtually any measure. Unemployment is way down. Inflation was bad, but it's way down. GDP growth is very strong. Job growth is at record levels under Biden. And yet 62% of Americans think that the economy is in bad shape. They're manipulated by Trump and by Fox News, and unfortunately, they don't see the truth. And yes, inflation was bad, but inflation is way down again, and wages have grown faster than inflation in the past few years. But people still feel angry, and I think it's that Trump continues to make them, see the world and the economy inaccurately, in the wrong way.
Can I jump in here?
Sure, Anne.
Part
please.
of the way that their information system works, because what the right does, what the MAGA information people do, is cherry pick. So they'll find some commodity where the prices have gone up in isolation, and it can be gas. They say, well, the economy is bad because gas is expensive. And then it's gas prices come down. So then they say, but actually the price of eggs has gone up. Well, if gas and eggs come down, then they'll go on to bread or lawn chairs or roller skates or whatever they can put in front of people to make them feel threatened and anxious and disregard what's happening in the bigger picture.
Do you both, I've been thinking a lot about this because I feel like Biden, I understand why you spend so much time talking about how well the economy is going in the United States compared to other countries. And of course, it's backed by facts. But also, another fact is that there are 140 million poor and low-wage income people in the United States, according to the Poor People's Campaign. And I remember during the California Senate debate, The moderator said, how would you rate the economy on a scale from 1 to 10? I thought Katie Porter had the best answer, and I always wonder why Democrats can't talk like this. She said it's a 5 because that's an average. CEOs of giant corporations have a ton of money and they're doing really well. But farm workers and essential workers are struggling paycheck to paycheck. So you have some people who are doing obscenely well and a lot of people who aren't. So it's not black and white. And I just wonder why it's so hard to talk about it in those terms, Stephen, while also sharing the facts.
That's a great question, Rose. I think the Democrats, on one hand, want to boast that the economy really has done pretty well the past few years, once it got over this huge inflation, this big inflation surge. And I'm often mad at the news media. So yes, inflation rose to 9%, which is high, but the media was writing about it as if inflation had risen to 90% or 900%, like we're a third world nation. 9% inflation is bad. It's a good deal lower than it was in the 1970s. It's a good deal lower than it was after World War II. So on one hand, the Democrats don't want to boast and say things are much better because then they'll feel insensitive to the people at the bottom. And a lot of people are hurting. And if they say, if they show too much sympathy, say, well, the economy really isn't good, then the Republicans will jump all over them and say, look, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris are admitting that the economy isn't very good. So they've reached this position that will say the economy has improved, but we still have a long way to go. Rose, you just suggested that you just mentioned that 140 million number. I wrote in my Guardian piece today that, I've been writing about labor workplace economic issues now for 4 decades. I'm older than 40 years old. And back under Reagan, over 100 million Americans were really struggling financially. So I don't know, people point to the 140 million now, and I bet it was about the same number under Trump and about the same number under Obama and about the same number under Bush. There might be bumps up, but like the Republicans and Trump make believe that far, far more people are hurting now under Biden than was the case under Trump, and that's just not true. So we have to be careful not to buy the Trump BS that, all these Americans are struggling and it's all Biden's fault. Another huge Trump lie that drives me crazy is he says, there are 15 million, 20 million undocumented illegal immigrants in the United States, and that's all because of Biden and Harris. The majority of those people entered the U.S. long before Biden became president, but Trump is so dishonest. He says, it's all Biden and Harris's fault. They all entered since Biden became president. So we really have to be very careful in examining every single jot and tittle that Trump says.
Anne, anything to add before we go to break?
Yeah, a lot of it is the perception of politically active people in this country, which is not everyone. Something like over 40% of eligible Americans do not vote.
Right.
So you've got this two-tier economy. Now, around 60% of Americans own stocks. They're invested in the stock market. The stock market has gone up. All of the indicators we talk about correspond to that population who are high propensity voters. The bottom 40% who don't own stocks, who don't have access to good jobs and education, they live in a different economy. And as it happens right now, we have the highest rate of income inequality in this country since 1928. So it's 2 Americas we're talking about.
Yes, exactly. Thank you.
But that inequality has gone down the past year or two and rose under Trump. Anyway, so...
Yeah, no, thank you. It's important to get these facts out there. We're going to take a quick break. Today, we are talking about, a number of issues, Project 2025 on what's really at stake. But there's just so much involved with this because Project 2025 will transform all aspects of our lives. Today, we're joined by Anne Nelson, author of the book Shadow Network, Media, Money, and the Secret Hub of the Radical Right. She's written about Project 2025 for the Washington Spectator and the Progressive Magazine. Stephen Greenhouse is a longtime labor and workplace journalist. He has written about Project 2025's plans to gut civil service with mass firings and undermine labor rights for The Guardian. You can join us at 866-798-8255. You can also email your call at kalw.org. We'll be back after this. This is Your Call. I'm Rose Aguilar. Today, we are wrapping up our series on Project 2025, the Heritage Foundation-led authoritarian plan that would guide a second Trump administration. You can find all of our past shows at kalw.org. Click News and then Your Call. Ann Nelson is the author of Shadow Network, Media Money, and the Secret Hub of the Radical Right. Stephen Greenhouse is author of Beaten Down, Worked Up, The Past, Present, and Future of American Labor. They have both written extensively about Project 2025. What are your thoughts about where we are right now? And what is at stake with what we have learned about Project 2025? You can give us a call at 866-798-8255. You can also email your call at kalw.org. Jean has a good comment. Jean says the real threat is the America First Policy Institute, which really has Trump's ear. Listen to Fresh Air today. Ken Benzinger was just on Fresh Air today, and in the New York Times, he writes, late this summer, a prominent right-wing think tank invited conservatives from around the country to learn how to work in a second Trump administration. Former Trump officials shared strategies with attendees for combating leftist civil servants in the federal government and dealing with the media. The classes could easily have been the work of Project 2025, but the meetings had nothing to do with that enterprise or the Heritage Foundation. Instead, they were the work of the America First Policy Institute, a right-wing think tank that has, with little fanfare or scrutiny, installed itself as the Trump campaign's primary partner in making concrete plans to wield power again. And in your book, Shadow Network, you wrote about so many groups that most of us have never heard of. So what are your thoughts on this? How should we be thinking about Project 2025, the America First Policy Institute? Who really has the most power?
I think it's deceptive to think of these as totally separate entities. They overlap. They have individuals and organizations that correspond to them. They serve somewhat different functions, but I'm going to go back to, so I covered a Pentecostal political rally in Michigan this summer called the Courage Tour. And that was co-sponsored by the America First Policy Institute and Turning Point USA, Charlie Kirk's organization. So Turning Point, it also supported Project 2025, right? So there's like this direct connection between them. And if you look at the projects that they're laying out, they're quite similar. Right? They're not different policies. They're related policies described in perhaps somewhat different language, and maybe one has one cadre of former Trump officials and the other has a different one. But for example, one of the major chapters in Project 2025 was written by someone who worked for Stephen Miller in the White House. So it's a mistake to buy the argument that they present that these are separate organizations. They may be competing for favor, but they're not going to bring a different product to the table.
And for those who've not heard of the America First Policy Institute, the New York Times reports that it was founded by three wealthy Texans in late 2020. One of its leaders, Linda McMahon, is a former member of Trump's cabinet and a longtime friend. What are your thoughts on this, Stephen?
It's another unfortunate example where the billionaires can humongously use their huge power to have undue influence on our society. And I think Trump is getting so much support from billionaires, not just Elon Musk, this Timothy Mellon, this heir to a Gilded Age fortune, contribute $125 million to the Trump campaign. Miriam Adelson, the widow of the very right-wing anti-union casino magnate, Sheldon Adelson, has given $100 million to the Trump campaign. crypto folks have given, I'm told, like over $100 million to defeat Sherrod Brown, one of our favorite senators in Ohio. And I think American First is another example where with the far right people need some money to back them so they could hatch this plan so they could more efficiently assume power if and when Trump is elected, or try to grab onto power even if Harris wins. And they turn to the billionaire buddies, and the billionaire buddies give them money to set up this infrastructure. And they, instead of, just whistling into the wind, all of a sudden they have this, organization with 10, 20, 30, 40 people. They're putting out papers, they're sending out press releases, and all of a sudden you have to take them seriously. And that's in ways, the story of Project 2025. There are some very serious right-wing thinkers behind Project 2025, but there are some people who are a little kooky too. But if it weren't for, the billionaires, the very wealthy people, corporations, Project 2025 probably would never have taken place. And when I read, the section on Project 2025 about workers, I thought, this is so crazy. Trump holds himself out as a champion of the working person. He says, I'm going to fight for the forgotten Americans. And you look at the chapter on working people in Project 2025, and it's all about how to stick it to workers, deny them overtime pay, make unions weaker, make it harder for gig workers to be declared real employees so they can get overtime pay and minimum wage. Across the board, on one thing after another, I got like 50, 70 recommendations in the work-related chapter. It's all like how to figure out ways to make things better for corporations so they could increase their bottom line. And that's what the people, the billionaires and the corporations who funded Project 2025 want. And the same thing in the environmental chapter. They don't worry about protecting the environment. They worry about, fattening the profits for the oil and gas companies. And they're not worried about, global warming. And it's really this kind of pro-corporate, screw the liberals vision. And we're, again, as Ann said, if it weren't for, the Lydic Mans and the other billionaires, Project 2025, America First, might not exist, or if they existed, they would be much smaller, much punier, and be getting much less attention.
But I'd like to add
go ahead,
that
Ann.
Project 2025 and the Heritage Foundation have been actively recruiting and training militants who are supposed to be taking the place of these civil servants that they're going to purge. So, they've actually been taking action. And what I hear from people, out on the state level is that some of the people who are signing up for this training and these positions are would be laughable under other circumstances.
Yeah. I could talk about that for a minute. So right now under current rules, the president can really name only 4,000 people once he or she's elected. 4,000 people, irrespective of traditional merit-based civil service rules where you only get a federal job through testing. You could have 4,000 political appointees. Trump and Project 2025 want to change that vastly and bring back lots of the ugly old patronage-based spoil system so that the president could appoint 50,000 political appointees. And the Heritage Foundation and American First, and Ann, correct me if I'm wrong, I think they put together a list of like 20,000 people who supposedly would be ready to take jobs in a new Trump administration, 2 weeks after he takes office. And a lot of good government groups say it's a terrible idea for Trump to try to greatly politicize the federal civil service like this. Right now we have a lot of good, honest, dedicated, federal civil servants who, call things the way they see them. If they see that ExxonMobil is violating an environmental regulation, they'll call them out. But if the people in EPA are many layers of them are political appointees, and ExxonMobil is a huge donor to the Trump campaign or buddies with the Treasury Secretary, then EPA will be under a lot of pressure. The rank and file workers in EPA will be under lots of pressure. Don't say that ExxonMobil is violating the laws, polluting that river illegally. So, I think that's the danger of this like 20,000 person right-wing vanguard that would enter the federal civil service and be much more activist than regular professional merit-based civil servants. And in ways, I think Trump hopes to turn the civil service into a battering ram to advance his agenda.
Right. And they want to make life hell for these civil servants, according to a clip of one of Russell Vought's speeches that ProPublica got its hands on. Here is Russell Vought discussing how a second Trump administration would treat civil service workers.
We want the bureaucrats to be traumatically affected. We want, when they wake up in the morning, we want them to not want to go to work because they are increasingly viewed as the villains. We want their funding to be shut down so that the EPA can't do all of the rules against our energy industry because they have no bandwidth financially to do so. We want to put them in trauma.
It's pretty brutal to hear those people laugh in the background there. That is a clip of one of the Russell Vought speeches ProPublica got its hands on. I also want to ask you both about why you think the Heritage Foundation and the 100 right-wing groups that worked on Project 2025 so proudly put out this plan for everyone to read. The other parts that are very disturbing are just the cruelty, the cruel parts in this and how they would affect low-income people. So again, according to the People's Guide from Democracy Forward, Project 2025 would make it harder for people to access food assistance by adding ineffective requirements and reevaluating important programs. They would completely eliminate the Head Start program. This is critical to uplifting kids across the country from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. It would also limit which disabilities qualify veterans for benefits. Again, this hasn't gotten that much attention. So it is so incredibly cruel. And why do you think they decided to make this public? Do you think it's because if Trump wins, he can say, look, we told you all what we were going to do and we have a mandate?
I think it's hubris. I think that they got a little triumphalist when they put it out. And I started tracking it last January. I saw a mention that it said that it proposed to eliminate the term reproductive health from all federal regulations, legislation, et cetera. And I was like, health? Really? So then that's when I wrote my Washington Spectator piece about it. But then I realized as I was working on it that it would appear and then disappear online. So apparently they put it up and then they took it down when they got panicked. But then Hansu Wong from NPR put it up in an archived edition, so it was just going to be there. They obviously got scared by the backlash against it. And that might be one reason that the effort of the America First Policy Institute was fueled, because what this movement does is take the same ideas and then just put a different hat on them and resell the same product.
And we should also say, of course, once this started getting a lot of negative media coverage and even in pop culture, Trump began distancing himself from Project 2025. And his transition team said they're going to blacklist people involved with Project 2025, according to The Guardian. But CNN reports that Vought says Trump has privately blessed his work. So why do you think they so publicly put this all out there, Stephen?
So I think Ann is right. One is hubris. They were very proud of it, but they totally miscalculated. I think they live in such a silo, that they don't realize that many of their ideas would be extremely unpopular. I think they were shocked by the extent of the backlash and the opposition. They didn't realize that at all. I think another reason they put it out was they had these billionaire sponsors, these corporate sponsors, and they wanted to show the sponsors that they had done their homework. And I also think they were naive enough, and this is part hubris, to think, they thought these are great ideas and the American people are going to embrace them. And they didn't realize how unpopular these ideas are. Sometimes when give speeches, and I mentioned some of the provisions, the recommendations in Project 2025. I say, do you realize that they call for like banning, abolishing all public sector unions? So, hey, police officers who support Trump, they want to get rid of your union. Hey, firefighters who support Trump, they want to get rid of your union. They'll abolish your union. So good luck in trying to get higher raises. Good luck trying to win better protections. I sometimes talk to construction workers, and I say, well, many of you support Trump. Well, you know that Trump wants to, Project 2025 would repeal Davis-Bacon, which is a key 90-year-old law that significantly raises wages for construction workers in public sector projects like highways and tunnels and bridges and airports. And the construction workers I speak to say, wow, I didn't know that. That's terrible. That's terrible. And Project 2025 has other terrible things that will undercut the wages of construction workers. And unfortunately, Project 2025 has so much bad, big stuff that sometimes it's hard to really describe the smaller, very bad stuff that would be horrible for certain groups like police officers and firefighters and construction workers and factory workers. So I think, Ann is right. There was huge hubris. They thought this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. They thought people would embrace it, and they were very wrong.
Stephen,
I
what
also
else?
think that they didn't think people would read it. So I actually read all 920 pages, God help me. And a lot of it is just dross. It's just bureaucraties, blah, 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 with anodyne statements like, oh, the bureaucracy should be more efficient. Well, yeah, everybody's in favor of that. Move on. And then you get to these zingers. And as Stephen says, some of them are just crazy town. So, for example, they say that the United States should end all economic relations with economic engagement with China, right? How would that work? I mean,
it would put Walmart out of business. Yeah.
It would put everybody out of business. And it says that the global security architecture should be shared with the Russia region. Oh, really? That's interesting. So, it's like wading through all this language to find both the dangerous elements and the crazy town.
Well, to that point, how far do you think they will go? If you look at just a couple aspects here, Russell Vought in these ProPublica tapes, or the tapes that ProPublica got their hands on, said that Trump would deploy the military to quell what they perceive to be domestic riots. I mean, we've heard former Defense Secretary Mark Esper say Trump said, can we shoot protesters during the George Floyd uprising? So what do you both think? How far do you think they would go to deploy the military to stop protests? Anne?
Well, it depends on who they is. We're moving into a week where we'll need to be looking very carefully at three elements. One is the U.S. military, which seems at this point to be loyal to the Constitution. One is law enforcement, which has groups like the Constitutional Sheriff of America who are questioning constitutional principles. And then one is the militias. And the militias include active duty and veteran military people. I don't expect these three groups to act in concert. I don't worry about all three of them, but I don't avoid worrying about some of them.
Stephen?
So I think, Trump, you have to somewhat believe what Donald Trump says. He says he wants to use the military against protesters. He talked about, shooting some protesters once upon a time. And fortunately we had, sane people in the military who warned him that, that's not a good idea. That was a horrible, horrible idea. And I think part of some of the folks behind Project 2025, I think some of the things in Project 2025, they wrote to mimic, to copy what Trump had said, to help ensure that they would have Trump's support. So I fear that if Trump wins, he's going to, want to use the military in horrible ways against protesters. He might pick a few cities and say there's too much crime in those cities, and he's going to send in the National Guard, and things could get extremely ugly and extremely repressive. Trump has already, no other president in history has talked about sicking the Justice Department on his critics in the press, on his, on politicians, on Adam Schiff. It's just amazing. So if he's so willing to misuse and abuse the Justice Department, I fear he will be just as ready to misuse, abuse the military in very bad, repressive ways.
In our final minute, how do you think the media will be affected if Trump wins? Because Vought in these tapes compares media outlets that accurately reported the results of the 2020 election to state-sanctioned media in China. Anne, how do you think freedom of the press will be affected if Trump wins?
I think it will be negatively affected. I think that there are active enemies lists that are present in these circles. But I also feel that the both sidesism of some of the major media in this country will protect them, and that they'll figure out how to use them to promote their information agenda. I wrote a previous book, Red Orchestra, about the anti-Nazi resistance in Germany, and that's pretty much what happened. They closed down the opposition press, and they subverted the kind of centrist cover your posterior press, and then they went full bore with their own propaganda outlets.
Stephen, your thoughts on the media and final thoughts? We've got about 30 seconds left.
Yeah, I think the rank and file journalists in the newsroom, they want to do the right thing. They want to report on the truth about what a Trump administration is doing, is thinking of doing. But I fear that there has already been repression. Trump has already repressed freedom of the press. I think, one of the big reasons that both the Washington Post and the LA Times adopted this new policy that they're not going to make endorsements is that they're scared of Donald Trump winning and punishing them, just as Trump sort of punished Bezos in his 4 years as president, because he was so mad at Bezos for the Washington Post coverage. So I don't doubt for a second that Trump and his minions are going to try to think up 3, 5, 10 dozens of ways to pressure the press, to repress the press. And I think he will really look at, what Viktor Orban has done in Hungary to really domesticate a lot of the media and make sure the press does what he wants.
Stephen Greenhouse and Ann Nelson are authors and writers. They have written extensively about Project 2025. Find out more about their work, kalw.org. Click News and Your Call. Thank you so much for your work, Stephen and Ann, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you. It's good to be with you, Ann.
Thank you.
Same here.
And thank you for joining us. I'm Rose Aguilar. It's Your Call.